Have you ever wondered how an organization with no army, no territory, and no legal authority can persuade sovereign nations to rewrite their own laws? Governments can ignore companies. They can sanction banks. They can even leave international agreements. But when FIFA makes a demand, countries often negotiate instead of walking away. So here's the real question. What kind of power makes saying no more expensive than saying yes? Because once you understand the answer, you'll realize this story was never just about football. Most people see FIFA as the organization that runs football. It organizes the World Cup, sets the rules of the game, and promotes the sport across the world. At first glance, it looks like any other international governing body, powerful within football, but ultimately limited by the sovereignty of nations. That assumption feels reasonable because we are taught that governments always hold the highest authority. They write laws, collect taxes, control borders, and command armies. By comparison, a sports organization should have no meaningful leverage outside the stadium. Yet reality keeps revealing something far more unusual. When countries compete to host a World Cup, they don't negotiate from a position of absolute authority. Instead, many agree to conditions that would be politically difficult under almost any other circumstance. Laws are adjusted, commercial rights are protected, public resources are committed, and governments willingly accept obligations defined by an organization that owns neither land nor legal jurisdiction. At first, these decisions look like isolated compromises made for a sporting event, but they aren't. They are all symptoms of a much larger system, one that explains why FIFA has accumulated a level of influence that most organizations could never achieve. At first, it looks like FIFA has become powerful because it governs the world's most popular sport. But that's not the real reason. The real issue is not that FIFA controls football. It's that FIFA controls the only football system that no country can afford to leave. That distinction changes everything. Power is often imagined as the ability to force people into obedience, but the most durable form of power rarely relies on force. It comes from becoming so valuable, so deeply embedded, that leaving the system becomes more costly than accepting its rules. That is the lens through which this entire story should be understood. Because FIFA's greatest asset isn't the World Cup itself. It's a global system where governments, players, sponsors, broadcasters, and billions of fans have become too invested to simply walk away. This is Mind Over System, where we break down the systems and ideas that shape your life. People often believe FIFA's power comes from football itself. It doesn't. Football existed long before FIFA. It would still exist without FIFA. Children would still play in the streets. Clubs would still compete. Fans would still love the game. So if FIFA doesn't own football, what exactly does it own? It owns the system that everyone depends on. That system operates through three key mechanisms. Mechanism 1. FIFA owns the dream. The World Cup is not just another tournament. It is the highest prize in football. Every child who dreams of becoming a professional footballer imagines one moment above all others wearing their country's shirt on the biggest stage in the world. National associations dream of qualifying. Governments dream of hosting it. Sponsors dream of attaching their brands to it. Broadcasters fight for its media rights because billions of people are watching. The World Cup has become the most valuable asset in football, not because FIFA built the sport, but because FIFA controls the only competition that nobody can recreate. That changes the balance of power. If another company launches a new smartphone, consumers can switch brands. If another streaming platform appears, audiences can cancel their subscriptions. But there is no alternative World Cup with the same history, legitimacy, prestige, and global recognition. That means every major stakeholder eventually arrives at the same conclusion. If you want the dream, you must enter FIFA's system. And once everyone wants access to the same dream, FIFA no longer needs to chase participants. Participants begin chasing FIFA. That is where real leverage begins. Mechanism 2. FIFA writes the rules. Once everyone agrees that the World Cup is too valuable to ignore, the negotiation changes completely. It is no longer about whether countries want to participate. It becomes about the conditions under which participation is allowed. This is why hosting a World Cup is not simply organizing a football tournament. It is entering a contractual system where FIFA defines extensive commercial, operational, and organizational requirements before a ball is even kicked. Critics often focus on individual controversies, special legal arrangements, commercial protections, exclusive sponsorship rights, or government concessions. But these are not separate stories. They are different expressions of the same principle. Whoever controls access to the world's most valuable football event gains enormous influence over the rules surrounding it. Not because governments suddenly become powerless, but because the opportunity itself has become valuable enough that governments willingly negotiate on FIFA's terms. The lesson is simple. The owner of the game rarely has to force compliance. The value of the game does most of the work. Mechanism 3. FIFA makes leaving more expensive than staying. This is the mechanism that transforms influence into lasting power. In theory, any country could reject FIFA. No law forces a nation to remain inside the organization. But decisions are not made in theory. They are made by comparing costs. Walking away means losing access to the World Cup. It means isolating players from the highest level of international competition. It means reducing commercial revenue, broadcasting opportunities, sponsorship value, and global visibility. It means disappointing millions of supporters whose emotional investment extends far beyond the game itself. The longer a country remains inside the system, the more interconnected everything becomes. Players build careers around it. Clubs depend on it. Sponsors invest in it. Media companies pay billions for it. Fans organize their lives around it. Leaving no longer feels like exercising a choice. It feels like accepting a loss that almost nobody is willing to bear. That is why FIFA's greatest source of power is not its ability to punish. It is its ability to make departure far more costly than participation. And once a system reaches that point, it no longer survives because people are forced to stay. It survives because almost everyone concludes that staying is the better option. None of this is just theory. Over the past few decades, a consistent pattern has emerged whenever countries compete to host the World Cup. Governments routinely invest billions of dollars in stadiums, transportation, security, and public infrastructure long before the tournament begins. At the same time, they accept extensive hosting obligations covering commercial rights, sponsorship protection, and event operations. The details vary from one tournament to another, but the direction is remarkably consistent. The closer a country gets to the World Cup, the more valuable FIFA's approval becomes. The same pattern appears beyond host nations. Broadcasting rights continue to reach record values because global audiences keep growing. Multinational companies compete aggressively to become official sponsors because no other football event offers comparable worldwide exposure. National associations remain inside FIFA's ecosystem because leaving would isolate their players from the sport's highest stage. These are not isolated events. They all point to the same reality. FIFA's influence does not come from owning territory, collecting taxes, or commanding an army. It comes from controlling a system whose value keeps increasing as more governments, businesses, players, and fans become dependent on it. Imagine two countries. The first government looks at the cost of hosting the World Cup and decides it is simply too expensive. Billions of dollars in public investment, years of preparation, and countless contractual obligations. From a purely financial perspective, walking away seems like the rational decision. The second government reaches the opposite conclusion. It sees something beyond the balance sheet. For 1 month, the country's name dominates global headlines. Millions of visitors arrive. Billions of viewers watch its cities, culture, and landmarks. Tourism, foreign investment, political prestige, and national pride suddenly become part of the same equation. The World Cup is no longer just a football tournament. It becomes a global branding opportunity that almost no other event can match. Now, ask yourself a simple question. If hosting the tournament offers so much value, who holds the stronger negotiating position? The country that wants the World Cup, or the organization that decides who gets it? That is the moment FIFA's influence becomes visible. Not because it can force governments to participate, but because governments voluntarily compete for access to something FIFA alone can grant. And once access becomes scarce while demand keeps growing, power naturally shifts toward the gatekeeper. The story becomes even more unsettling when you realize that FIFA's influence doesn't end with football. Every World Cup leaves behind a blueprint that other global institutions quietly study. Build something billions of people cannot replace. Become the only gateway to it. Then let dependence do what force never could. That is why the most powerful institutions of the 21st century rarely look like empires. They don't occupy territory. They don't command armies. They don't rewrite constitutions. Instead, they build systems so valuable that governments, corporations, and individuals willingly adapt themselves to remain inside. This is why the FIFA story matters. It reveals a broader shift in how power is accumulated. In the past, influence belonged to those who controlled land, resources, or military force. Today, influence increasingly belongs to those who control access. Access to markets. Access to technology. Access to financial networks. Or, in FIFA's case, access to the most prestigious sporting event on earth. Once access becomes indispensable, the rules of power change. People stop asking whether the rules are fair. They start asking what they must do to stay in the game. And that may be the most important transformation of all. Power no longer needs to compel obedience. It simply needs to make exclusion too costly to accept. The biggest misconception about FIFA is that it became powerful because it governs football. It didn't. Football created FIFA's opportunity. People created FIFA's power. Every player who dreams of lifting the World Cup, every government that competes to host it, every company that pays millions to sponsor it, every broadcaster that fights for its media rights, every fan who refuses to miss a match, together they reinforce the same system. That is how modern power is built. Not by taking something away from people, but by becoming the one thing they no longer want to live without. Once that happens, authority no longer depends on force. It depends on dependence. And that is why the story of FIFA is far bigger than football. It is a reminder that the strongest institutions are often not those with the greatest legal authority. They are the ones that become so deeply woven into people's ambitions, economies, and identities that the system begins to sustain itself. Because the moment people fear losing access more than they question the rules, power has already reached its highest form. So perhaps the most important question isn't whether FIFA has too much power. Every successful institution seeks to expand its influence. The more useful it becomes, the more leverage it naturally gains. The better question is this: what gives an institution that level of influence in the first place? The answer is rarely force. It is value. The moment an organization creates something that billions of people, thousands of businesses, and entire governments believe they cannot afford to lose, power begins to shift on its own. FIFA didn't invent that rule. It mastered it. And once you recognize that pattern, you stop seeing FIFA as an exception. You begin seeing it as a reflection of how power increasingly works in the modern world. Football will continue long after today's FIFA leaders are gone. The World Cup will still inspire children. Fans will still fill stadiums. Nations will still dream of lifting the trophy. The names may change. The executives may change. Even the rules may change. But one question will remain. Who really holds power, the institution that writes the rules, or the billions of people who give those rules their value? Because if enough people stop believing that a system is indispensable, even the most powerful institution begins to lose its influence. But as long as the world believes there is no greater stage than the World Cup, FIFA won't need to prove its power. The system will keep proving it for them.